What's up, short attention span history nerds? My name is Mike and you're watching 10 Minute History. Today's video was sponsored by a new online one-stop shop called Merry Element. Merry Element is an online store with really cool, fashionable denim jackets with Star Wars characters, Simpsons characters, Rick and Morty characters, and a lot more. They carry super cool car gadgets, kids products, pet products, high-end quality shirts, tank tops, and hoodies. It's like an online mall without the mall rats and the bad customer service. And if you use the code 10minute at checkout, you'll receive 25% off all purchases. It's a great store based in America. In fact, it's based in Texas. And best of all, you're supporting a small business, the backbone of America. Click the link below in the description and don't forget to use the code 10minute for 25% off all your merchandise. The first superhero known for bullets ricocheting off him like a salad ricocheting off Lizzo's fork was done in by a bullet. That's like hearing that Jason Momoa was done in while swimming, or Ozzy Osbourne died from a bat biting his head off. That aside, my favorite Superman bullet scene is from Superman Returns, where Brandon Routh, who plays Superman, takes a .50 caliber bullet straight to the eyeball without even blinking. Now that scene is fire. Now, I've been a Superman fan since childhood. Christopher Reeves has been and will always be my Superman. But the one who brought Superman from the pages of the comics into the hearts and minds of all red, white, and blue Americans was George Reeves. The story of George Reeves' death has more holes in it than a homeless man's underwear. The evidence is perplexing and poorly handled. The people involved range from colorful to drunk to suspicious, and the whole thing stinks of a cover-up. But then again, that was the call of day for the LAPD in the 1950s. In the early morning hours of June 16, 1959, George Reeves' Superman was found dead in his bedroom, butt naked, with a bullet through his head. The bullet would later be found in the ceiling, with two more magic bullets found in the floor next to his feet. And while Superman lay dead in his upstairs bedroom, his fiancée and the three guests downstairs were partying. Allegedly, his soon-to-be wife disturbingly narrated the action going on above. As George was walking upstairs, she stated, "He's going upstairs to shoot himself. He's getting a gun," and then a single shot rings out, to which she calmly replies, "And now he shot himself." Now that's one cold-hearted woman. And after hearing the gunshot, they all waited 45 minutes before they called the police. The death was quickly ruled a suicide, but several of those near and dear to the actor believed that there was no way he would have killed himself. Sure, he was depressed after being typecast as Superman, but he wasn't suicidal. The whole ordeal is like an optical illusion. From one angle, the details clearly show a man who, in a moment of desperation, shot himself. But from another angle, the death of George Reeves looks a lot like murder. Reeves was 38 years old when he first donned the iconic Superman suit, and he was the perfect actor for the part. He was big, rugged, handsome, tall, and physically fit. Through 104 episodes, the actor smiled in pictures with his fists on his hip in the famous Superman pose, and he made many appearances to promote his hit television show, including a guest spot in costume on the I Love Lucy show, who incidentally is my wife's Superman. Lucille Ball and George Reeves, both dressed as Superman, is my favorite episode of I Love Lucy. Come to think of it, I think my next video might be on the tragic life of Lucille Ball. Stay tuned for that one. His work on the show would earn him fame as the original Superman, even though that technically wasn't true. Bud Collyer had voiced the Man of Steel on the radio from 1940 to 1951, and Kirk Allen had played Superman in two 15-part serials that ended in 1950. But who remembers those guys? Reeves brought this into the American living room for every person to enjoy. But all was not well in Metropolis. Getting tapped to play the famous superhero may be the pinnacle for most actors today, just ask Brandon Routh and Henry Cavill, But Reeves agreed to the role out of desperation. Reeves was dead broke and out of work when the part came along, which is a little strange considering he had a big role in the largest motion picture of all times. The Iowa-born actor got his big break when he was hired to play one of Scarlett O'Hara's suitors in the 1939 Gone with the Wind. Imagine the feeling of your first job in Hollywood being the biggest motion picture of all time. Must have been how C-3PO felt when he got the role on Star Wars. After Gone with the Wind, Reeves had a string of B-list movies and was slowly working his way back up to the leading role status when the bombs fell on Pearl Harbor. Just a year after the war, Hollywood was also recovering at a snail's pace after the war, and Reeves wasn't finding any work, and he became so desperate that he began digging holes for dookie tanks. And that's a crappy job. After the war, Hollywood wanted to capitalize on the fact that the good guys had just won the war and the bad guys had won. And there was no better way to do so than by putting America's favorite adopted alien into the American homes on every television set. Reeves' manager sent him on the audition for the new Superman show. Reeves knew that the show had the potential of being very popular, but it was almost because of this that he was reluctant to take it on. Firstly, TV was brand new in American households across the country, and it was seen as the medium for actors that couldn't make it on the silver screen. Secondly, even more worrisome, The Adventures of Superman was marketed mostly to kids, rather than being seen as the hunky superhero who had worked his way up into the leading man. Reeves was worried that the role would typecast him as the kids' beloved Superman in the eyes of the world, and worse, in the eyes of casting directors. And guess what? He was right. Reeves spoke out about these difficulties in a 1958 Evening Star article titled "No Work for Superman." When asked why he took the role, he simply replied, "Because I was hungry." But after 6 years, he was having a hard time pushing his career forward. The producers wouldn't even give him a job. They'd take one look at him and think, "This is impossible," Reeves said. Now, before you go on feeling sorry for Reeves, he was making $5,000 a week, or $50,000 a week adjusted for inflation. I would work on a Western with Alec Baldwin for $50,000 a week. And while Reeves may have been famous for being Superman, he claimed that the role wasn't making him a whole lot of money. That's $50,000 a week. For a B-list actor, that's a lot of cabbage. Now, many claim that his depression began from not being movie star rich, but rather being TV star rich. Again, I would work on Executive Decision Part 2 with nutbag Steven Seagal as John Leguizamo's stunt double. And if you don't get that reference, it's because Steven Seagal punched John Leguizamo on set for giggling, and it knocked the breath out of him. Some said it was the profound depression and frustration with Reeves' career that led to that fateful night in question. But his business manager and his mother, among others, stated that while, yeah, he was depressed for being typecast as Superman, but he wasn't depressed to the point that he was suicidal. In fact, his mother explained that it was not like my Georgie to do a thing like this. That was an actual quote, and that was my best George Reeves mother impersonation. Now, it's impossible to know exactly what was going on in Reeves' head that night, especially on a night of heavy drinking, but it does seem that Reeves was taking steps to fixing his situation, following the path so many others have taken throughout Hollywood history. Reeves turned to directing, producing, and writing when he couldn't find the roles that he wanted, and he was working on creating and fulfilling a great career for himself. He even directed the final 13 episodes of Superman and told the Evening Star that he was enthused about where his career was going. But it wasn't just Reeves' career that was going through a dramatic turn. His personal life was also eating out of the toilet. After breaking up with his wife, Reeves had engaged in a long affair with actress Toni Mannix, who just so happened to be married to a notorious fixer for MGM Studios. And Eddie Mannix wasn't just a punk in Hollywood, he was rumored to have mob connections. Now, Reeves banging Eddie's wife wasn't the problem. Eddie was fine with all that. In fact, Eddie was having affairs himself. The relationship between Tony and Reeves, Eddie didn't have a problem with it. The issue was that Reeves eventually broke Tony's heart when he called it off and began his relationship with a woman who would eventually become his fiancée. Eddie wasn't happy. And when Eddie wasn't happy, people disappeared and died. While Reeves and his new fiancée, Lenore Lemon, were supposed to get married only a few days after his death, Lemon allegedly had soured on him after she realized that the older Superman wasn't quite the loaded Hollywood player that she thought he was. Again, he was making $50,000 a week. Their relationship was full of booze and fighting. After his death, it was revealed that he left everything to Tony Mannix, which could have been an oversight since he and Lemon had only been seeing each other for 6 months. Or it could have been that he was giving a big middle finger to Lemon. And if you watch the movie Hollywoodland, which chronicles Reeves' death, I'd say he gave her the big middle finger. This was the scene on June 15th, 1959. Reeves and Lemon went out for a boozy night on the town. They got home around 11 p.m. A couple hours later, 2 friends stopped by for drinks. Lemon and a male friend who was staying at the house were more than happy to entertain the group, but Reeves was already in bed and was not pleased with the noise going on downstairs. After all, he was a 45-year-old, and those of us that are around the same age can attest that 11 p.m. is night time. It's not party and drinky time. According to the statements given to the police, statements that were no doubtably slurred, Reeves came down to ask everyone to be quiet. They convinced him to stay for a drink, and then he stomped his way on back upstairs, grumbling about the young punks and their loud music. It was then that Lemon's actions became truly strange. She began the narration that I mentioned earlier. He's going upstairs to shoot himself, she allegedly said. A noise echoed. See, he's opening the drawer to get a gun. Then a shot. I told you, he shot himself. 45 minutes later, the police were called. It may have seemed like an open and shut case. Man found upstairs, gun on the floor, a single bullet wound to the head. But there were a few details that just don't quite make sense. First, Reeves was found butt naked when he was known not to sleep in the nude. There was no doubt that he had enjoyed a few libations that evening, but even drunk, it's a stretch of the imagination to think that someone would strip butt naked just before killing themselves. The police also found 2 gunshot holes in the floor, as well as one in the ceiling that they were able to trace back through to Reeves' head. And yet the eyewitnesses claim to have only heard 1 shot that night. And then there were the bruising and the other marks on Reeves' body. All of the conspiracy theories surrounding Reeves' death would eventually be played out on the big screen in 2006's Hollywoodland. Now, I find it odd that Reeves wanted to be on the silver screen again, and he was, only this time it was after his death and being played by Ben Affleck. It all boils down to 3 scenarios. 1, Reeves committed suicide. 2, Eddie Mannix killed the actor in revenge for upsetting his wife. And finally, there's the fiancée. The theory goes that Lemon was drunk and unhappy that night and shot her soon-to-be husband. The 45-minute delay in calling the cops was the time that it took to cover up the murder. But this theory has holes in it, and considering Lemon was a greedy, money-hungry socialite that wouldn't stand to inherit a penny since the 2 weren't married, I'm just not buying it. This was the 50s, and fiancé meant squat. You needed that paper to get paid. Despite the questions that remain to this day, no real investigation was ever mounted. Reeves' mother hired a high-power lawyer to get the case reopened, but he quickly dropped the case and his new client for reasons unknown. It was well known that she was a difficult woman and hard to work with. Nobody enjoyed being around her, and this could have been the case, or it could have been dropped because Eddie Mannix caught wind of him and decided that he should drop the case. In the end, Superman was dead, and there were no superheroes coming to save the day. While this may have been the final act for George Reeves, it was the first act in what would become one of the biggest mysteries surrounding the role of Superman. Reeves' death was first in what would become a string of tragedies surrounding actors that played Superman. Next came Christopher Reeve, Marlon Brando, Margot Kidder, Lee Quigley, and many more. his death would quickly kickstart what is commonly known today as the Superman curse. So that's the 10-minute history version of the death of Superman. If you have any theories surrounding George Reeves' death, I'd like to hear about them in the comments section below. And if you like short history videos on a variety of subjects, please consider subscribing to 10-Minute History. And if you liked this video in particular, please consider giving it a thumbs up. And if you didn't like it, please consider giving it a thumbs down. Either way, I get to know what videos you do and do not like. I greatly appreciate your support. If you know someone that might find this channel or the subjects interesting, please share the video with them. And remember, use 10-Minute when shopping at Merry Element to receive 25% off all your merchandise. Until next time.